As we resist this racist system, we will persist with courage in our hearts. And as we build with each other, we will grow and we will thrive as we resist this racist system. Though we persist with rage in our hearts, oh, we will breathe with each other. And we'll remember we are still alive as we resist this racist system. We will persist with joy in our hearts. And as we build with each other, we'll let truth and justice be our guide as we resist this racist system. Though we persist with grief in our hearts, oh, we will breathe with each other.
There we go.
It wasn't in
And
all the
we'll
way.
remember.
Oh, wait.
Oh, Koach, we lost your sound. Could you unmute yourself? Sorry.
Oh, because they was trying to mute everybody else. There we go. As we resist this racist system, we will persist with courage in our hearts. And as we build with each other, we will grow and we will thrive as we resist.
Sorry, we unmute yourself one more time. So sorry.
This is great. Hey, y'all, when y'all come in, mute yourself as we resist this racist system. Though we persist with rage in our hearts, oh, we will breathe with each other. And we'll remember we are still alive as we resist this racist system. We will persist with joy in our hearts. And as we build with each other, we'll let truth and justice be our guide as we resist this racist system. Though we persist with grief in our hearts, oh, we will breathe with each other. And we'll remember we are still alive. Oh, we will breathe with each other. And we'll
Koach keeps getting muted.
and we will breathe with each other. And we'll remember we are still alive. And we will breathe with each other. And we'll remember we are still alive. I'll invite you to breathe with me. Inhale and exhale. Inhale all that is good and high and holy. And exhale anything that you don't need right now to be present in this space together with all of these beautiful people for this teach-in. Let's inhale again. Inhale all that is good and high and holy. Exhaling anything that we don't need in this moment. And on this last inhale and exhale, I'll invite you to just let out a sound, whatever sound that comes out when you exhale. So let's inhale, exhale. Turn it over to our friends who are going to start us off tonight for this teaching. Thanks for being here, y'all.
Thank you, Rabbi Koach. Thank you so much for being here and opening us with your words. I'm sorry about the muting, but it was nothing personal. We were really, really glad to have your voice here and your presence here. Thank you so much for getting us started. Hi, everybody. I'm Rabbi Alyssa Wise. It's nice to see you all here. Thank you all for joining us for this teach-in tonight. I want to say that sadly, in addition to accidentally muting Rabbi Koach, we also are having a tech glitch where unfortunately there won't be closed captioning. So I apologize for that. We usually make it a priority to have that available, and I'm sorry that it's not going to be available this evening. We are recording this. There are a lot of people who want to get this learning from this wonderful panel that we have for you tonight. So I just want to let you all know that this is being recorded and will be shared out. So people, if you enjoy this evening's conversation and get a lot from it, it'll be something that you can share with your community. So welcome. Thank you, Koach, for reminding us to breathe. This is a pretty scary, stressful time. And I imagine I'm not alone and feeling a lot of anxiety and fear based in the uncertainty and the chaos and the crisis of this time. And that's kind of part of the reason why we organized this teach-in, was knowing that a lot of us are holding a lot of fear and anxiety. And one of the things that I like to do, like when I'm feeling that way, like it leads me to want to just do more organizing, right? And do more community building, right? And what the core elements that I kind of understand of organizing and preparedness to respond to moments of crises like this one is to build relationships, right? That's the core of all organizing. And though we're not exactly, Zoom isn't exactly the best place to do that, there is still some community building that can happen here. And then to build our skills as organizers and to build our analysis, right? And those things help, at least for me. And I feel like part of the theory of organizing is like having a strong rooted network of relationships, being skilled and having a sharp analysis as parts of what allows us to feel prepared and ready to meet crises. So tonight is about building our skills and analysis, right? And in particular, figuring out kind of, we've been talking for many years, a lot of us, about the idea that safety, real safety and enduring safety for everyone is found through solidarity, right? Not through ethno-nationalism or isolation or separation. I don't know about you, but I got that message growing up in the Jewish community I was a part of, was that isolation was the only way Jews could be safe, right? And part of what I've learned is that there's another way, right? And that, and at moments like these, we're kind of tested that when we say safety is found through solidarity, we have to be like, what does that actually mean? Right? Like, what is shared safety? Right? And so we wanted to offer this space for learning so that we can actually build our understanding of what it actually means to, again, have the relationships, to what does it mean to show up for each other? What is it? And part of the shared safety piece also means making connections, right, between the different struggles and the different crises that we're facing, and understanding how attacks on immigrants, attacks on trans people, attacks on Muslims and Palestinians, and anti-Semitism all have a relationship to each other, right? Understanding that. The thing that brings us together is a shared commitment to Palestinian freedom, right? At Rabbis for Ceasefire, and for those of us who are going to be presenting on the panel, right? And so making these connections between these interlocking struggles domestically and in the struggle for Palestinian freedom is part of what it means to show up and build solidarity. And the other thing that it is about practicing our skills. Like, that's an analysis thing, but the skills is about how do we hold contradiction, right? One of the core values at Rabbis for Ceasefire is, from the rabbinic tradition of elu ve'elu, this and that. Like, these are both realities of our world. These are both, in the Talmudic phrase, is like these and those are both words of the living God, right? these and those have to exist together, right? And so we need to understand how to hold contradiction, and how to have things be messy and complicated. And where we are now is messy and complicated. We have the ADL out here defending Elon Musk, doing a Hitler salute, saying nothing, literally nothing, to decry Trump's plans to ethnically cleanse Palestinians from Gaza. And Jews deserve better than this, I think. So and we all deserve better than this. So let's dig into it. We're going to have the way that this is going to flow is we're going to hear from three different teachers from three different kind of perspectives. The first is going to be Rabbi Mordechai Liebling, who is going to, it's such a blessing to be able to learn with you, Mordechai. Thank you so much for being here. And he brings decades of experience as a Jewish communal leader, having built the Reconstructionist movement, which I'm ordained from. So I benefit from your decades of labor of building that movement. He's a movement builder and organizer. He's a child of Holocaust survivors. And he's now an elder who demonstrates to me and to us how it's possible to embrace the work of sharpening your political analysis and building your courage and alliances as a lifelong project. He's been thinking and teaching on anti-Semitism for decades. He's the vice chair of the board of Faith and Action, and he just recently stepped down, Mazel Tov, and about to go on a little sabbatical as the senior advisor at Power in Pennsylvania. And of course, Mordechai is a leader with us in Rabbis for Ceasefire. And after we hear from Mordechai, we're going to hear from Kohenet Shoshana Brown, who brings wisdom from her work as a staff member at the Diaspora Alliance, who's developing political partnerships to disrupt the attempts by the right to weaponize charges of anti-Semitism, to silence criticism of Israel, and to push a white Christian nationalist agenda, thus making Jews more vulnerable, right, to violent anti-Semitism, as the term anti-Semitism risks losing its meaning. She also weaves into her work Jewish spirituality. She is a Kohenet, a Hebrew priestess, which is a movement that has harvested feminist lineages from Jewish tradition and reignites them for our time. And the Kohenet movement is, I think, a really powerful model on how to mine Jewish history and tradition for liberatory ends. She's a leader of the Black Jewish Liberation Collective and recently brought a group of Black American Jews to Nigeria to engage with the Jewish Igbo community there. And Shoshana is also a leader in Rabbis for Ceasefire. Finally, we have Jonathan Brenneman, beloved comrade. If you don't know Jonathan, you're in for a treat. He's a Mennonite Palestinian American community leader and organizer who has been part of birthing a new organization since October 7th. We've been partners on this journey, Christians for a Free Palestine, which is an organization that's really stepping powerfully into the role of challenging Christian Zionism as Christians, and an organizing presence that our movement has actually desperately needed for so long. So thank you, Jonathan, for finally making it a reality. This past year, Jonathan's leadership has brought us the Interfaith Action for Palestine that brought dozens of organizations and hundreds of people to DC to confront Christians United for Israel's annual summit. And this fall, Christians for a Free Palestine, and Jonathan in particular, played a lead role in doing security for our mass Yizkor ritual in New York City. For any of you that were there, we were being held and protected by our comrades at Christians for a Free Palestine. And thank you, Jonathan, for stepping forward in that kind of manifestation, right? Demonstrating in real time what shared safety looks and feels like. He's on the steering committee of Mennonite Action, another new organization since October 7th, and is building like a truly impressive organization with compassionate, visionary communications and sharp, clear politics. So as you can tell, this is going to be deep. So let's get into it. Mordechai, I'm going to pass the mic to you.
Great. Thanks for the kind words, Alyssa. we're going to have it's kind of a whirlwind tour here through anti-Semitism. So as Alyssa said, this stuff is can be jarring, some of it. So ground yourself, and the way through this stuff is really is solidarity. Um, so let's begin. And why isn't my screen advancing? There we go. We're going to start with a simple definition of anti-Semitism: discrimination, prejudice, hostility, or violence against Jews as Jews or Jewish institutions. That is the Jerusalem Declaration on Anti-Semitism, written by about 200 scholars. There is another definition, the IHRA definition, which creates a lot of problems, and we'll maybe hear about that later. But we're going to use this very simple definition that is widely accepted. Why is my screen not advancing? There we go. Whoops. Okay. This is a very useful term, Jew as a visible agent of oppression. We'll be using this. So in pre-modern times, the Polish nobility invited Jews into Eastern Europe to be tax collectors and innkeepers. For the right to practice Judaism, Jews had been expelled repeatedly from different countries in Central and Western Europe. So this was an attractive offer, but it had a catch to it. When the rulers needed to divert anger from themselves, they could scapegoat Jews. So this is the beginning of Jews as scapegoats. And because the church had taught anti-Semitism, it was very fertile ground. This in the United States, anti-Semitism, as we know, large influx of Jews into this country in a 40-year period, people fleeing pogroms and poverty. When they come to this country, they're discriminated against in employment and in housing, in schools, in restaurants. So they faced anti-Semitism when they got here. The peak of anti-Semitism was was in the interwar period. You had the Klan was at its most powerful in the 1920s. And you had Henry Ford reprinting the Protocols of the Elders of Zion and other anti-Semitic screeds in his newspaper. And worst of all, there were these radio speeches by Father Coughlin that millions and millions of people listened to every week. And there were some people who thought and pushed for the United States to enter the war on behalf of Germany. And that was a real possibility for a moment. Some of you may have read Rachel Maddow's book about this time, but this is a time of very public anti-Semitism in the United States. I'm having a hard time with the, there we go. It's not, okay. So in the United States, after World War II, after the Holocaust, and anti-Semitism becomes really taboo because of the heinous crime of the Holocaust, you have a serious decline of anti-Semitism in the United States until 2016 and the Trump administration. And then we begin seeing a rise in anti-Semitism again and anti-Semitic acts. And the worst of those acts was the largest killing of Jews in U.S. history because the murderer believed that George Soros was funding an immigrant caravan as part of a Jewish plot to replace white people. So replacement theory is something that aggravates white Christian nationalists and white Christians. I was in Charlottesville in 2017 and heard them chant, "Jews will not replace us." And this person acted on that, believing that Jews were behind replacing white people in America. So what's the function of anti-Semitism? The Russian czars used anti-Semitism to deflect popular rage onto the Jews. And the czar commissioned this book called The Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which is the classic conspiracy. Jews in this book are the puppet masters controlling everyone in the world. They control the capitalists and the communists. They are to blame for everybody. They're behind everything. And this is the conspiracy theory from which all other conspiracy theories derive. Sadly, the protocols are now printed in 30 or 40 languages and are still widely distributed around the world. I was surprised to learn one day they are in Chinese and Japanese as well, and in many countries where there are very few or almost no Jews, the only thing they know about Jews is the protocols of the elders of Zion. So this is key. The modern function of anti-Semitism is to preserve political power by dividing people and diverting onto Jews the anger of people who feel oppressed or cheated. This obscuring where real power nationally or internationally lies. Most contemporary conspiracy theories derive from the protocols of Zion and are anti-Semitic. So in terms of political analysis that Alyssa was talking about, the function of anti-Semitism is to preserve power by dividing people and blaming Jews. Anti-Semitism functions to maintain the structural inequities that underlie all other forms of bigotry and oppression. More broadly, anti-Semitism divides potential allies, serves as a galvanizing force for white nationalist movements, and undermines democratic movements. Megan Black and Eric Ward have spent years studying Christian nationalism and anti-Semitism in the United States. So you saw what the function of anti-Semitism is: division. Racism has a different function. The original and ongoing function of racism is the economic exploitation of Black, brown, and indigenous people, wealth extraction. Racism starts as a form of wealth extraction, enslaving people, colonialism, and it continues as a way to extract wealth. And then later on, and now is used to also for the preservation of the political power of whites. But it's important to see that racism and anti-Semitism have a different function. And the different function means it has a different form. For anti-Semitism to be used to divide people, there needs to be some Jews in visible positions of power. Again, the phrase, the visible agent of oppression. Racism is the template by which much of the United States understands oppression, and it looks very different than anti-Semitism. Therefore, anti-Semitism is often not seen or understood. Different function, different form. Just a moment on Jews and whiteness. Wow, okay. My arrow is not working. Jews and whiteness. Jews who present as white have gained the privileges of whiteness, and white presenting Jews assimilated into this country for safety and opportunity. There's no blame, no shame, but they did it for safety. But these privileges are provisional and can be revoked by the Christian majority at any time. And we need to remember there are a large number of Jews of color in the United States, 15% of all US Jews, and they face both anti-Semitism and racism. If you remember anything from these 10 minutes, remember this: anti-Semitism is used to divert and divide. It allows someone to direct rage at a simplified and comforting image of some demonic cabal pulling the strings, the puppeteers. And instead of engaging in complex analysis of systemic oppression and exploitation, it was once called in the 19th century, poor man's anti-Semitism is the poor man's socialism. It allows people to avoid any kind of deep analysis of what's going on. And it allows for the preservation of capitalism while allowing to indulge in anti-capitalist rhetoric, because the problem is not the system, but the Jews. The Jews are the mean, bad capitalists who take advantage of the system. Otherwise, the system would work well, is how the rhetoric goes. So, very recent example of divert and divide, the Women's March. January 2017, maybe the largest demonstration in American history, 3 million people around the country. Within a year, anti-Semitism tears it apart. People on the right raised charges of anti-Semitism against some of the leadership, tore the organization apart. Thankfully, they were able to rebuild, but much weakened. Anti-Semitism was successfully used to tear apart a large popular people's movement. Not the first time. Oh, I wanted to show you this. The first time that we know in America clearly, this is in the populist movement of the late 19th century. On the left, I don't know if you can see, they're standing on the shoulders of Rothschild. So there's Napoleon, and there is a Democratic leader who led a boss of what they thought of as the immigrant masses, standing on Rothschild's shoulder, crucifying Uncle Sam, crucifying Labor and the Republican Party. And on the right side, it says, "This is the United States in the hand of the Jews," as Uncle Sam is being crucified by the Jews for the sake of gold. So populist movement, one of the first interracial, interfaith popular movements in the United States in the 1890s, used anti-Semitism and racism was used to tear apart the populist movement. And here are two cartoons from that period. And then the contemporary example is the Women's March, and then the other contemporary example happening right now as we speak is charges of anti-Semitism used to undermine pro-Palestinian protests, leadership of liberal academic institutions, and free speech on campus. Anti-Semitism once again being used to divide the progressive movement. So what are some of the symbols and dog whistles of anti-Semitism these days? George Soros. Whenever you see or hear these words by people in the Christian right, that they're talking about Jews. Soros, cosmopolitan cabal, cultural Marxism, New York money, replacement theory. Those are all code words for the Jews are doing something. Here is from a respected magazine, a newspaper, the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, came out a couple of years ago. And you can see this black person turning to a white person, blaming George Soros for a liberal DA. So here we're trying to split blacks and Jews, blame Jews for the problem. You have a white and a black police officer. So Jews are being blamed here. And this is in a very mainstream newspaper a few years ago. Soros, symbol of Jewish money, being blamed for crime and for being crime. Just as a reminder, not that this group needs to hear this, but anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism are different. Criticism of Israel is not ipso facto anti-Semitism. It's a government that can be criticized just as any other. And Zionism and Judaism are not the same. Zionism is an ideology and Judaism is a religion. Predictability. Whenever there is a significant rise in the income wealth gap, and right now we probably have the greatest income wealth gap in American history. So many people feel cheated and angry. And that whenever that happens, there's a rise in anti-Semitism, fulfilling the scapegoat function. Anti-Semitism is a tool that is used. It is not a wave. It is not natural. It is not inevitable. It is a deliberate strategy that is used consciously to divide progressive movements. This is a time of extreme economic concentration. Many middle-class and working-class white Christians feel that their power is crumbling over their lives. They feel demoted. They feel they are losing status. And right-wing politicians will exploit this by stoking racism, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, homophobia, transphobia, etc. This is used by right-wing politicians, as we see happening every day in this country, and they promote white Christian nationalism as the answer. The core beliefs of white Christian nationalism as this is a Christian nation, and if we don't live Christian values, God will abandon us. And they see being Christian as core to being truly American, and that God has called Christians to exercise dominion over all areas of American society. This did not begin now. Remember, the roots of this in some ways are the Pilgrims the Puritans who came here to found the Christian nation. There have been people calling for this to be a Christian nation from the earliest moments of this country. But Christian nationalism sees Jews as a separate race, and they believe that we are demonic. There's odd words for us, but they really believe that we are demonic. Looking at their, and white Christian nationalism is the merger of white nationalism and Christian Christian nationalism, and it's a way of understanding the world that blends white supremacy and Christian nationalism. And its only goal is to promote the power of white Christians and exclude non-Christians. They promote hatred and violence and feel that is justified. Christian Zionism is the foreign policy of white Christian nationalism. Jonathan's going to talk more about that, but these are absolutely linked. Anti-Semitism and white nationalism. Anti-Semitism is core to white nationalism. In the United States, when the civil rights movement succeeded, racist people couldn't understand how black people could achieve that. So they said, oh, it must have been the Jews behind it. And then when marriage equality came about, they said, how could those people beat us and get marriage equality? Must have been the Jews behind it. So the Jews in their ideology are blamed for everything. And they see us as a separate race that needs to be literally taken care of. Here is a poster from a right-wing organization, the Stormer. They're kind of neo-Nazis, and you can see that. So every time some anti-white, anti-American, anti-freedom event takes place, you look at it, and it's the Jews behind it. So this is what they teach. So how should we assess anti-Semitism from the left versus the right? Anti-Semitism always benefits those in power by dividing people. Anti-Semitism is a core and necessary belief of white nationalism. White nationalism advocates and commits violent acts against Jews. Anti-Semitism on the left is not a core or necessary belief, nor is violence advocated. And in fact, anti-Semitism is in contradiction to the values professed by the left. So you can have a conversation there and show how anti-Semitism is against the interests of the left, because we see that it divides progressive forces, as in the Women's March or on campuses nowadays. So there is a serious difference between left and right-wing anti-Semitism. Organizations like the ADL and others in the Jewish establishment like to make them equal. They are not at all equal. They are very different. Project 2025 is a clear path to Christian nationalism as well as authoritarianism. Some of us have looked at Project 25 in terms of many of the things that has been enacted in these first 2 weeks, but we also need to look at the parts that the media has really not covered, the part that Project 2025 rejects the separation of church and state. It really wants religious beliefs over civil laws, and it reinforces the message that America must be a Christian nation. That is embedded in 2025. It's explicit there. So we have to, when people start talking about it, we also have to make them aware that this is a part of the plan. People in powerful positions who believe we need to be a Christian nation, the Vice President of the United States, the Speaker of the House, the Secretary of Defense, at least one Supreme Court justice, and probably more, various agency department heads. So people in the highest positions of power in this country right now want this to be a Christian nation. Last week, the president signed an executive order to combat anti-Christian activities, whatever those might be. And we know that Elon Musk has repeatedly made anti-Semitic comments and made X a safe place for anti-Semites. I was at an hour-long webinar just this afternoon by Political Research Action, all about the new apostolic reformation, which is the scariest of the right-wing Christian groups. It poses a threat to democracy. They believe in bringing about the kingdom of God. It's a very utopian movement. Speaker of the House Johnson and Justice Alito have flown their flag. Johnson in front of his office has their flag. Alito flew it in front of his house. Paula White Cain, who is an apostle in the New Apostolic Reformation, is now the head of the faith office that Trump established last week and is Trump's personal chaplain. And they see Trump as chosen by God. So in addition to all of the other things that we are reading about in the newspapers every day about what this administration is doing, this is also an essential part of their agenda, and we have to be aware of it. I'll just close by saying in the current issue of The Atlantic, there is an article by a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative reporter all about the New Apostolic Reformation. In terms of our political education, we need to know what these people are doing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mordechai. I need to take a little breath. It's a lot. And it's also really important that we understand this, right? It's kind of like we have to take care of ourselves as we do this learning, but we need to kind of also do this learning. Shoshana, I'm going to pass it to you to kind of pick up kind of where Mordechai kind of left us, more or less. And I feel like the main question, I feel like the real question is like, why is the ADL defending Elon Musk doing a Nazi salute when they claim to be the leading voice against anti-Semitism? It doesn't make sense. Can you illuminate for us?
Yes, I can. Thank you so much for having me, and also Rabbi Mordechai for going through so briefly what is really hours of learning. And so just inviting folks into the beginning of unraveling all of that history that you shared and how it all matches up. So what does this all bring us to? Here's the thing. The ADL and other legacy Jewish institutions have a vision and a strategy for Jewish safety that requires Jewish people to be in the good graces of those in power, mostly to advance a pro-Israel politic. And right now, those who are in power are white Christian nationalists, as Rabbi Mordechai just went over. Moreover, because they, meaning the ADL, have prioritized a pro-Israel advocacy agenda, they often overlook the sources of anti-Semitism that are overwhelmingly coming from the right, because those same people are supporters of Israel. So I'm going to take us back for a second. This didn't happen overnight, right? And this wasn't always the case. We have a long history and Jewish tradition of having multiple strategies for what keeps us safe. And the ADL has squarely taken up the strategy of political Zionism as the answer to what keeps us safe. But this didn't happen yesterday. This didn't happen in 2016 with the first Trump. This has been happening for decades, right? For decades, we've seen the ADL make choices to prioritize access to the state and to white supremacy, even if that comes at the cost of fighting the actual sources of anti-Semitism that make Jewish communities vulnerable. The ADL wants to have access to power to protect the Israel-US relationship and protect pro-Israel politics in the United States. And they know who is there for that coalition. They know who's in that coalition for them. It's the far right. They are politically astute. Do not underestimate them. They were able to foresee long ago that Musk would have influence over Trump, that Musk would be part of the White House. And they want to be where they can have influence, where money and power is moving. And they're willing to overlook bad behavior that incites violence for the sake of maintaining those relationships in hopes of reciprocity. But I know, and maybe you all know, that it's not just the ADL that has made these choices to cozy up to power. Netanyahu has consistently made this choice, right? Through seeing Trump as an ally and excusing his continued bad behavior of spreading anti-Semitic theories, whether they be on Twitter or X now, or they be on True Social, right? They excuse these because of his Zionism. This is shown, demonstrated through his moving of the embassy, for example, to Jerusalem, for example, right? Beyond Netanyahu's very close informal relationship with Trump, there's also a long history of investment and attention to Christian Zionists and increasing philo-Semitism, which is the overstated love of Jews that results in harmful behavior to Jews, posits Jews as allies of Christian supremacy under this framework of Judeo-Christian values. And we can see this happening with comments from Ron Dermer, the former Israeli ambassador to the US, who in 2021 suggested that Israel should on a public stage, suggested that Israel should prioritize the passionate and unequivocal support of evangelical Christians over that of American Jews, who he said was disproportionately amongst, quote unquote, our critics, right? Disproportionately amongst the critics of Israel. And Netanyahu himself has called Christian evangelicals Israel's best friend. So his closest advisors and him all understand the power of this alliance, the power of the alliance of Trump and Christian Zionists to their benefit. And they have long embraced the notion that support for Israel unquestionably eliminates concern for anti-Semitism. Israel, because of this is part of what we see a long history of Israel radicalizing rightward for decades. We have seen this and it has been studied. And we see the political fractures growing in the Jewish community. The pro-Israel establishment, as a result, has looked for other constituencies to bolster their support. And the Christian right has been a key partner. Okay, so how does this make sense? How does this all work? Well, if you understand that the ADL conflates pro-Israel politics with Jewish safety, for them, shielding Israel from criticism and accountability is then how they keep Jews safe. This is why the conflation of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism is so dangerous. There's a long history of the ADL partnering with law enforcement and other powerful actors to repress movements for liberation, from spying on anti-apartheid activists in the 90s and Muslim Americans in the early 2000s to today and their campaign against pro-Palestine activists. The ADL has compared anti-Zionist Jews and Palestinians to white nationalists, even as their own data shows actual violence comes from the right and white nationalists. This means that their Israel advocacy agenda requires them to actively downplay the real threat to Jewish communities. So in 2023, Jewish Currents did an audit of the ADL's own data that they released. And what Jewish Currents found was where they counted all pro-Palestine marches as anti-Semitic incidences, including those led by Jews. The ADL undermines its own credibility by categorizing Jewish-led marches against the war in Gaza as anti-Semitic incidences. But even by their own data, according to researchers at the Jewish Currents, organized white nationalism was responsible for more anti-Semitic incidences in 2023 than every year since 2017. And that there is a clear correlation between anti-Semitism and anti-LGBTQ organizing. So similarly, Trump's administration's anti-Semitism program should also be understood as part of this strategy to dismantle civil rights law in favor of a Christian nationalist vision of a society. And in that vision, Trump is also making clear that he is only committed to protecting Jews who agree with him. As just one example, his use of Palestinian as a slur against Chuck Schumer makes clear that Trump considers the roughly 70% of American Jews who are Democrats illegitimate. We're here gathered today because many of us on this call are watching in horror and connecting the dots between Elon Musk's Nazi salute and the anti-Semitism executive order that was, by the way, numbered executive order number 14188. And if you're not familiar with studying Nazi ideology or the far right, I want to share with you that the numbers 14 and 88 are Nazi symbolisms and references in the far right to Nazism, to Hitler's ideology, and stands for Heil Hitler. And so the fact that his executive order on anti-Semitism was number 14188, we cannot see that as a coincidence. And its content threatens to deport student activists who themselves are Jewish. And this whole conception of how we fight anti-Semitism, of who is anti-Semitic, mirrors Hitler's early strategies of deporting Jews. Before the final solution, before the Holocaust, the very initial stages was about deporting Jews. And so at the same time, as Musk unleashes this torrent of anti-Semitism and has forged the disassembly of all the guardrails meant to keep social media spaces safe by cultivating the largest hotbed of the spread of anti-Semitic rhetoric in the world on Twitter, the ADL simultaneously has downplayed it, right? They've downplayed it so much so that their top executives have quit over their downplaying of how serious this is. And this all is part of an exchange that has long been underway between pro-Israel groups and the far right. Because as long as they adopt the IRA, right, the International Holocaust Remembrance Association, a definition of anti-Semitism that places at the center critique of Israel as anti-Semitism, and as long as they pledge support to Israel and ensure no consequences for what Israel has done to Palestinians, then they get a pat on the back. You're good. You're not an anti-Semite. And they get to keep using anti-Semitic rhetoric. They get to keep flaming the fires and creating the culture that is so dangerous to Jewish community. And this looks like Elon Musk meeting with the AfD, the far right party in Germany, to encourage their ethno-nationalism and doing a Nazi salute, but being excused because he supports Israel and he went on a trip to Auschwitz. So in my view, he's performing philo-Semitism, which is wildly dangerous. The ADL's anti-Palestinian campaign has made them further a common cause with anti-DEI and CRT efforts. So further cementing them on the right, this idea that Palestine, Palestinians, pro-Palestine activism, Palestinian freedom is a threat to Jewish safety, aligns them with people on the far right. So they make bedfellows, right, by fighting anti-Semitism on college campuses and building partnerships with the police and with military. They build partnerships with right-wing coalitions that also on college campuses want to chill speech, that also want to ban the teaching of critical history in America, that also want to stifle speech and activism, like Virginia Fox and other GOP members who want to ban the teaching of slavery and racism in America. So this is not new. The ADL is building on a history and legacy of a strategy for Jewish safety that is built on ethno-nationalism, militarism, and aligning themselves with those in power who are often dangerous to Jewish community and other marginalized communities. This is not new. It didn't happen overnight. But we're here because there's also a long history of building a different kind of vision. There's also a long history of saying that Jews are safe when we ally ourselves with other communities, with other marginalized groups, when we build power with the people, when we build labor movements, when we fight for justice, right? This is in the container of organizations like Rabbis for Ceasefire and Black Jewish Liberation Collective and Diaspora Alliance and If Not Now and JFREJ and JVP and all of these organizations that currently exist, which stand in a long legacy going all the way back to the Bund and even further, which is about being in solidarity and finding safety in solidarity. And so we're here because we're part of that vision.
Thank you so much, Shoshana. Beautiful. Way to really redeem it at the end. A little hopeful note right at the end, not to leave us like too despairing. I really appreciate that. Jonathan, I want to pass it to you to speak to, what this dreadful alliance means for Palestinians, both in Palestine and in exile, and what the strategies are that, in the Christian community, you're pursuing to build shared safety.
Yeah, thank you, Rabbi Alyssa, and so grateful to be offered the space to speak here. And I'm going to start by kind of jumping off where Shoshana and Mordechai were talking about this alliance of the ADL and the far Christian right, and you talked about why the ADL has chosen to partner there. I really want to focus on why are right-wing Christian anti-Semites so in love with the ADL and so in love with Israel. And of course, as Mordechai mentioned, the answer is Christian Zionism, which is the foreign policy of white Christian nationalism. And from my perspective, Christian Zionism may be the most overlooked influence on U.S. Middle East policy in general. It's both a pillar of the far right white Christian nationalist agenda, and it's also like its adherents can be found in nearly every congregation in America. Even if they wouldn't call themselves Christian Zionists, they probably hold some of those beliefs, some of those anti-Semitic Christian Zionist beliefs, but don't even know it. Yet there's little attention brought to Christian Zionism because it disrupts the dominant narrative around Palestine. It creates a false binary of Jews versus Muslims while ignoring that the vast majority of the quote-unquote pro-Israel lobby is Christian, right? And Mordechai talked about a long history of ignoring the Christian power that's there and claiming Jewish power as the center, right? And when I say that the majority of the pro-Israel lobby in the U.S. is Christian, just to give one example, Christians United for Israel, which we talked about earlier, is the largest Zionist organization in America, claiming over 11 million members. That's more than there are Jews in the U.S., right? Its leader, John Hagee, has said multiple anti-Semitic things, including things that we mentioned here. He's talked about Rothschild bankers in Europe controlling the U.S. economy. He has claimed that Hitler was sent by God to send Jews to Israel. Yet, if you went to Kufai's website today, their main thing is going to be fighting anti-Semitism. And you'll see this a lot with the people who are screaming about anti-Semitism from the right tend to also hold these anti-Semitic ideas as well. I say that Christian Zionism is the foreign policy of Christian nationalism. And when I say that, Christian Zionism is promoting a certain policy in Israel that is really, it promotes Israel's worst, most racist, and even most genocidal policies at this point. Because Christian Zionists hate Palestinians and do not care about Jews. Christian Zionism holds that Jews living in the diaspora must relocate from their homes to the Levant, must take over the land, all of the land in historic Palestine, as well as parts of modern-day Syria, Jordan, and Egypt. That Israel must expel all non-Jews from that territory, and that Israel must participate in ceaseless wars to bring about the rapture for Christians and apocalypse for everyone else, including Jews. This dehumanizing vision is what the incoming ambassador to Israel is. This is how he will view the region. And I can't help but see this as a vision behind U.S. policy that multiple administrations have taken. And this is not new. Christian Zionism actually predates Jewish Zionism. One example, the phrase, a land without a people for a people without a land, was coined even before the modern political Zionist movement was born by a Christian Zionist. And Christian Zionism really helped bolster the fledgling Jewish Zionist movement. For example, Lord Balfour, famous for the Balfour Declaration, was himself a Christian Zionist. And I have a quote here where he's basically saying that the idea was we can get rid of Jews in Europe by sending them to Palestine. And this was behind his declaration. So the quote is, a serious effort to mitigate the age-old miseries created for Western civilization by the presence in its midst of a body which is too long regarded as alien and even hostile, but which it is equally unable to expel or absorb. Right? These are classic anti-Semitic ideas that Lord Balfour was using in justifying the Balfour Declaration. And Christian Zionism has long been a staple of white Christian nationalism, beyond just being its foreign policy. Christian Zionism really took hold in the U.S. in the 1920s and 30s, as Mordechai mentioned, also a time where anti-Semitism was at its height. And Christian Zionism really attached itself to the Christian fundamentalist movement, because the idea behind Christian Zionism was the Bible is a fortune-telling device. And you can tell the future by this, and you can get rich through it. And one of the fortunes it told was that Jerusalem would be ruled by Jews. And so in 1967, the Christian Zionists were able to say, look, we were right about Jewish sovereignty over Jerusalem. So we must also be right about integration being demonic, about women not having rights, about queer people being and trans people being sinful, right? And so this is one of the ways that it has justified the racist, the anti-queer, the anti-women politics of the Christian right. By recognizing, and of course, the whole time, by demonizing Palestinians. And there's no space in the white Christian nationalist agenda for a Palestinian Christian like me, despite my family's Christian history going back literally to Jesus in that land. And I think that by recognizing that the people who are leading the charge in supporting Israel's worst policies are the same people who are leading the charge against queer folks, against trans folks, against immigrants, Black folks, Muslims, Arabs, and Jews, we find common cause with the broader progressive movement. So this can be seen in the Heritage Foundation with Project 2025, which Mordechai mentioned, and also their addendum called Project Esther. In Project Esther, the right-wing Christian organizations, and they basically did not consult hardly any Jewish organizations in doing this, laid out a plan claiming to be fighting anti-Semitism, but really it's a plan to demonize and destroy the pro-Palestine movement under that claim of fighting anti-Semitism, while in Project 2025, they are promoting anti-Semitic Christian nationalist agenda. So by recognizing Christian Zionism as the foreign policy of white Christian nationalism, and by putting Christian Zionism in focus, we can see that the most anti-Semitic and the most anti-Palestinian people in this country are the same people. And it offers us a clear path to fighting anti-Semitism and fighting for Palestinian rights together.
I can't tell if we lost Jonathan. Are you done? Or did you mute yourself?
Sorry, that was it. That was
Okay, you felt complete. Okay, I was like,
yeah.
okay, great. Thank you. Sorry, I was like waiting. I was like, is he gonna keep going? Thank you all. Thank you so much. This has been so rich. I mean, I think that, just to close, I know if there's anything, I feel like one of the things that and I feel like you spoke to this, Jonathan, really powerfully now, but I want to kind of loop back to Shoshana and Mordechai, kind of rooting back to like the thing that brings us together at Rabbis for Ceasefire and as part of this movement is this commitment to Palestinian freedom, right? And so I wonder if you could speak just a little bit more about how this work is connected to that, right? Like this is the making the connections piece of building shared safety. Mordechai or Shoshana or
Okay, sure.
yeah.
There at this point in time, the Palestinian freedom and real freedom for Jews are completely interwoven. That as long as Jews are going to the Israeli state and speaking in the name of Jews is going to oppress Palestinian people, we can't possibly be free. That oppression, what we know about oppression, the government that's oppressing people, another set of people always ends up oppressing its own people. One of the reasons that the North ended up fighting against slavery is because there was less and less freedom in the North in the United States as slavery went on. Oppression breeds oppression constantly. It feeds on itself. There is no way that Jewish people can be free in the world as long as the Palestinian people are being oppressed in the name of Jews. It just leads to more oppression within and for Jews. The struggle for freedom is inextricable at this point.
Mm.
I'll say exactly what Rabbi Mordechai just said in reverse, which is that those who are oppressed will free us all. And I can see the ways in which aligning ourselves with building shared solidarity and fighting for the freedom of Palestinians allows us as a Jewish community to have a stake, because I've seen our Jewish community actually evolve in magical ways. Our solidarity, our welcoming, our understanding of who we are as a people, our understanding of our religious practice, the evolution of our religious practice, and how we understand our own Judaism and how we understand ourselves in the world has changed because we have been making choices to be on the right side of history. And as Paulo Freire often says, right? We have to we have to free everyone, right? Like when we talk about liberation and freedom and oppression, when we talk about safety, like there can't be safety for one. This is not a zero-sum game. This is not a time where we think that we can have safety for Jews and then at the cost or expense of everyone else. The truth is, including that vision for Jewish safety that I talked about, that the ADL and Trump and Musk and the far right and Christian evangelicals, etc., want to push, also is not safety for Jews, it's for specific people. And that group of people does not include me. And it does not include many people on this call. It does not include Mizrahi Jews and Sephardi Jews and Ethiopian and B'nai Israel. And I can go on, right? Black Jews and all of the above, I can go on. But we have to understand that when we're talking about Jewish safety, it has to be safety for everybody, right? If we think what Jewish safety means, it actually means demilitarization around the world. It means fighting for a planet that can breathe. It means fighting against all of the ways that bombs have destroyed the earth and that we are connected to the earth. To understand that is to understand why we must have a stake in Palestinian freedom. We must, because there is no freedom without that. There is no freedom without destroying racism. There is no freedom without dismantling anti-Black racism, anti-Palestinian racism, anti-Arab racism, without dismantling patriarchy, without dismantling white supremacy, and without dismantling Christian supremacy.
Jonathan, do you want to add any last words on this question before we close out?
And what Rabbi Shoshana said was so beautiful. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, just to reiterate, yeah. Freedom for some is not freedom, right? It's got to be all of us and them.
Thank you. So thank you so much, Mordechai and Shoshana and Jonathan. This was really powerful, and learning that was also so grounded in care and compassion and liberation. I really appreciate you, each of you, for how you showed up to this and this offering.
And Alyssa, I just want to say happy Tu B'Shvat also, which is why I made the point to bring it back to the earth and to remember that at the core. So happy Tu B'Shvat to everybody, and let's fight for a world where the trees get to live.
Yes.
And thank
Yes.
you, Alyssa, for setting up this and framing everything. You framed the evening really beautifully. So thank you.
Thank you, Mordechai. So you all, we have an opportunity next month to take this analysis into the streets. We are going to be part of bringing together a Jews Say No to the Trump-ADL Alliance action out front of the ADL conference in New York City. For those of you who are in New York City or nearby in Philadelphia, we can caravan. Monday, March 3rd at 5:15 p.m. Join Rabbis for Ceasefire and other organizations, if not now, and more Jewish left community to demonstrate that ADL does not speak for us, and in fact is putting us in active danger, right? And let's lift up our vision of shared safety and solidarity. And for further learning, if not now, is having a workshop on Project Esther, that addendum we talked about tonight to Project 2025 that's specifically targeting the Palestine Solidarity Movement. So that's going to be on February 20th. But it would be wonderful for those of you in the area to be with us on March 3rd. And so to close us out tonight, I was thinking that it would be sweet if we could offer each other a blessing of protection. In Jewish tradition, the oldest blessing we have in Jewish tradition, I think of as a blessing of protection. I'm putting in the chat a link to, this is the priestly blessing. You've probably encountered it before. I have a little bit of like an interpretive translation. So wherever you are, sometimes this is offered when we raise our hands, and in my family, we called it a kepi blessing, right? A blessing on your heads. You could put your hand on your own head, on your heart, or reach it outward and put the blessing out. You're invited to say it along with me or just receive it. Yevarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha. May you be blessed and protected. Ya'er Adonai panav elecha v'chunecha. May you be dealt with kindly and graciously. Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. May you and we all be granted peace and protection. Kei nehi ratzon. May it be so. Thank you all. Have a beautiful night.